and welcome back to another episode of Gaming the System, where the four of us, intersectional, geeky feminists that we are, get together to talk about all things gaming and all things feminism. And today we are doing part 2 of our discussion about online gaming communities and online communities, because we got really into it last time and covered a lot of ground, but we only actually got through about half of what we were hoping to get through. So we thought, well, let's bring in another session on it. So that's what we're doing today. And first, before we kick off, I just wanted to give us a bit of a reminder of what we talked about last time. So we looked at the parameters about what makes a community, and we the four of us agreed really that a community is a collective with common goals within a communication space, and communication is a key factor, and having a set of shared values is also quite important, and within that they may or may not be moderated. And Matt raised a really interesting point around boundaried or vocational communities as well. So, and they may be both of those, or either of those, or neither of those. So what we did decide is that communities are quite an ill-defined group, but we do feel that they are really important in general in society, and quite influential within gaming and activism and social discussion, social debate, really. So we talked about what makes a good community, and we talked about what makes a bad community. And so what we wanted to do tonight, sadly, is talk about what makes an ugly community. And so I'm going to go to Matt first, and ask, what do you think makes an ugly community? And do you have any examples of or experiences of that?
I do. I have been delving into some of the right-wing, incelly, culture-y areas of the internet to see if there's anything interesting to be gleaned. And I think, and this goes perfectly with, I've just come out of a 2-hour global union organizing session of how workers, the methods behind getting workers together to exercise their power. And the first thing they talked about was the concept of organic leaders, the people that people are just magnetically drawn to for whatever reason. And those organic leaders can be powerful forces for good, or they can be powerful forces against you. So if you've got someone who's very popular but doesn't like unions for whatever reason, if you don't get that person on side, then you're going to have a lot of problems. And so many of these online communities, they're people looking for someone to tell them, you're the victim. Everything that is happening to you that you don't like, it's not your fault, it's someone else's fault. And so often in gaming, that person is women. It's finding someone else to attack to bring them together. And again, some people are just authentically being driven by their hatred and the negativity within them. They're one kind of toxic leader, but then what I would argue is the worse is the grifter, who doesn't really care about any of it, doesn't have any of the moral standards or necessarily believe anything they say, but they are charismatic and can get people to follow them, like Donald Trump, for example. He's a lunatic scumbag moron, but people follow him. And he creates a terrible community around that. So I think what turns like a random stew of negative people, turning it really, really bad, is when they get one of those organic leaders who comes in and starts directing them towards particular goals.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Actually, I think it's also more powerful, isn't it, when somebody becomes a leader simply because they seem to be the right person at the right time, as opposed to because they were elected or because they went through any specific processes. There's a risk of this sort of idea that they have more right to be there than the people who go through an elected process or a formal process. I think sometimes, like, because they're like naturally the best person for that role, when actually they may not be. They may just have been in the right place at the right time.
They get put on pedestals a lot, though, and that's the danger of organic leaders. Is I'm very, very anti-pedestals. I think that any time people are held up as like, it's why I hate when people, national treasure, they're such a ledge. It's like, the trouble is that nobody is perfect. No human being is perfect. They have good things and bad things about them. So when these organic leaders emerge, people become so sort of zealot-like about following them that they won't accept any sort of flaw in them. It's like, no, you can't possibly criticize, because then that would mean the whole thing falls apart. Well, of course you can criticize, and of course nobody's perfect and there are flaws and stuff, and that's usually the downfall with organic leaders.
It's so easy to become getting to that point where you go, I've got this group of people who like me no matter what. I could do right by them and continue fighting for what they saw in me and continue doing the hard, thankless work that all you get is I'm making lives better for the people who are following me. Or you can go, yeah, we're great, excellent, fundraise for me and give me money and prestige, and I'll go to all the newspapers and say how I'm being cancelled for my controversial views. And then that's when you take an organic leader and then they evolve into a grifter, and then they just sail away on idiots' money.
Do you think that in those scenarios it's just about power for the individual that becomes the leader, or do you think that sometimes it can be that that they genuinely feel that they're doing the right thing? I mean,
I think just an example that springs to mind is the fallen from grace Graham Linehan. So, and again, since we're talking about online communities, it's a very good example. So Graham Linehan, just in case anybody out there doesn't know who Graham Linehan is, and bless you, Graham Linehan started off his career as the successful writer of brilliant shows like Father Ted and the IT Crowd, and then decided to just go completely off-piste and make his entire career about hating trans people and spreading hate about the trans community. And he has, within the gender critical community, become a saint, and he has become that organic leader. He has become that role. And when you say, Jem, is it about wanting to keep doing this? I mean, I find it really fascinating. I was listening to a really old Richard Herring podcast from 10 years ago with Graham Linehan on it, and that was obviously before all of this had kicked off and before that's what he was known for. But what he was talking about was how much he loved Twitter, how much he thought Twitter was just such a great space. And I think that for somebody like Graham Linehan, he's now doubled down on this so many times. He is committed to, this is what I'm doing, that I don't see how it's become so he couldn't turn around now and say, actually, do you know what, mate, I was wrong, shit, I went too far about this, sort of thing. And I'm sure emotionally, psychologically, he can't even imagine doing that. And I think that's the problem again with the pedestals and with the hero worship and the sort of putting people into that organic leader. It's like, oh yeah, is that they start to build a life around it. And if your whole life is, right, well, I've got to do this Zoom with this group and I've got to do this broadcast and I've got to tweet about this and stuff, and that's the whole life becomes about that, it becomes very hard to step away from that position, because what are you then?
Absolutely.
That Alex. Is not a defense of Graham Linehan, in case anybody tries to make that.
No, but like you say, just people are not that people are not all one thing, and that they're also not all bad. There's always, people find themselves in scenarios that they get back themselves into corners, and I do think that I can be quite I don't hold grudges, but I can be quite sort of like, you put yourself in this position and I'm not going to just let you out off the hook. However, I do feel that in order to genuinely move on in the so-called culture wars that we seem to have found ourselves in, communication is really important, and the ability to allow people to make mistakes and change their mind is also really, really important. So it's about getting that balance, really. So Alex, what do you think about all of this, and or about the online, the ugly online communities?
Well, what I think is this, and it is. So what I've observed from online spaces as a whole is that it's kind of like a mini representation of like human behaviour. It's quite fascinating in its own sort of way. There's often sort of little cliques that will form of different sets of people who have different viewpoints, and they'll kind of hash it out with people who have opposing viewpoints. And out of those, like you say, there'll be these sets of people who are leaders, quote unquote, who will kind of sort of spearhead a sort of following, and it can become very toxic. And I think what's weird is that even though it's not a physical atmosphere, there is still an atmosphere online when there's a negative feeling on a community. It's really hard to describe, but it drags the community down. And there's this feeling that, if someone appoints themselves like a leader of a space, there is a lot of gatekeeping. That's one massive negative of online spaces, particularly around gaming, or just any online space, really. And when there's a gatekeeper, it's essentially their way or the highway, which is a very negative sort of space to be in, really, because it just creates these tensions and arguments constantly. And it undermines people who are simply asking questions and wanting to know more information, because you can't ask a question. How could you ask a question? That's putting the leader under fire. It's putting them in a bad light, undermining them. And it just creates this sort of whirlwind of tensions, and it's just not it can be very tricky to manage in terms of keeping things smoothed over, speaking from the perception of a moderator, which is an interesting place to be, because of course I have my own opinions, but I can't express it as fully as I might be able to as an anonymous person online. The other thing, what else happens is that, it's just, because it's behind a screen, people aren't really aware of, tone can be very difficult to kind of pay attention to. And I think a lot of communication, there's obviously, that creates a barrier to communication already, because there's no tone there. But it just leads to so many snap judgments of things. People read it and they take it as what they view and nothing else. So if they take it badly, it must automatically mean that, oh, this person's against me because they've written this. And if you're in a space that's, say, unmoderated or not moderated for a certain amount of time, those words are there on that screen for you to look at over and over again. And it can be a very difficult place to be mentally if there's a lot of hurtful things or hateful things going on within the community, and all those things are laid bare to be accessed and read over and over. It's not like a face-to-face conversation where things can be said in the heat of a moment and forgotten hours later. They're there to be constantly checked up on all the time and accessed, which is pretty bad for people's mental health.
Yeah.
Those are kind of some general observations, I would say. So I don't know if that feeds into particularly much of what we've touched on already, but it's what I've observed in my time
I think it's
as a moderator.
really interesting. I think that I think last time Caroline talked about how in the real world people's communication would be different from how
Yeah.
it is
Of course
often
it would. Yeah.
online. And I
Yeah.
think, what you're talking about there is it picks up from that really, and I think the point you made about, when something is written, I'm really sorry, but there's a very loud tractor just about to come past my open window now. So apologies if you can hear that. So yeah, no, I think that it really hooks into that, and the point you made about once it's written and it's there, you can kind of keep going back and looking at it and pore over it and pull out bits that and in a way that when you say something in a conversation or an argument, it's everyone's memory is the only thing that they've got to go on, and yes, that has problems because sometimes we're like, you said this, and it's like, I didn't, and in a written argument, obviously you can see that. And I think given that most gaming communities, the vast majority of gaming communities, are in an online space, they are perhaps more at risk of these aspects, and that's why you can find communities spiraling into sort of negative place. Caroline.
Maybe it was making me think about Discord. That was because like loads of gaming communities now exist within Discord. Like there is a Discord for it, and I love Discords because they're really interesting. Where you can have the text channels, the voice channels, put in all your little apps and your mods and stuff like that. But what I have never done in any of the Discords that I'm involved in is go into the voice chats. And it's, we talk about this in gaming in general, but I do wonder what those voice communities are like on Discord. And, who is it just drops into a room and to avoid? And I found this I think there was a social media app as well that was like that. That's just conversations, audio. Because I think you're right. There is something about the written word, the ability to highlight like you'll see it so often on message boards back in the day and Twitter now, where somebody quotes everything that was said and then like, right, point one, the reason this word is wrong, and you've spelt this wrong as well. Whereas with audio conversations, does that occur in the same way? But I'm so terrified of audio spaces online that just from Call of Duty alone has just made me go, right, never going into an audio space ever again. That I don't know what they're like, but I think that's definitely somewhere people should be looking at for sort of what a gaming community is doing now, is listening in on Discord conversations.
Absolutely. So Caroline, do you want to do you have something to add about the ugly communities that you've experienced?
I think I probably that was very Boris Johnson-esque, wasn't it?
Oh God.
It's an entire public schoolboy stalling technique that they're taught, which is that, so that people don't think that you haven't got an answer, you talk a load of bullshit, while in your head you're actually working out what you're going to say when you get to the end of the bullshit, which is what I've just done. So, no, I mean, I think that we were talking about maybe having a little introduction to Gamergate and having a little bit of a run through of what Gamergate is, because obviously, like I could bore you about the Lib Dem youth and students message boards from the early 2000s, but I don't feel like that counts as a gaming community. So, I'll tell you about Gamergate instead. I mean, just Gamergate, it gets mentioned a lot, but just to do us a quick fact rundown, my version of what happened in Gamergate, essentially in 2013, a nice lady released a game that wasn't a shooty killy game. It was about exploring emotions and mental health and had an interesting sort of story scenario thing behind it. This lady, Zoe Quinn, and it got some good reviews online. And so then a bunch of incel 4chan twats went mental about it and said, how dare she get good reviews? Clearly something's going on here, because they felt very threatened. This is, what we see a lot of the time with the white male able-bodied straight community, which is they see the world around them changing and suddenly think, oh no, there will be no space for me. I will not be allowed in this world. And it's like, of course you'll be allowed in this world. Just don't be a dick to the other people coming into this world. But anyway, and so the communities on 4chan and 8chan, which, as we now know, are like the breeding ground for all things that are terrible in the world, particularly. I keep wanting to say K-pop, and I'm not trying to say K-pop. I love a bit of Korean pop music. What am I trying to say? QAnon, that's it, right?
K-pop, QAnon, they're quite different things.
Old age. Anyway, so right, all the 4chan, 8chan stuff, they got furious about the fact that there was some good reviews out there for this game, started slagging it off, but also tried to suggest that some of the good reviews were because of who Zoe Quinn was having a sexual relationship with. Maybe she was emotional as well, I don't know. And this one incident spiraled for the next, I mean, it's still going on in some ways, but really for the next 4 years, it spiraled into a massive online battle that, as I love all the memes, the memes are, it's about standards in video game journalism. It was never about standards in video game journalism. They were just literally pissed off that a game got a good review, a game that was made by a woman and that was womanly in its tone and the way it acted. Two other women who got hugely dragged into this, Anita Sarkeesian and Brianna Wu, for standing up for what was going on, all got doxxed, harassed, death threats, rape threats, had to have security, police involvement, FBI involvement, and it's the first thing that everybody sat up and took attention of. Oh shit, maybe misogyny is horribly virulent in the gaming community to the point where women are getting death threats. And I think that it's one of the things that annoys me slightly about it is that I feel that the people who were behind Gamergate are not the only gaming community. So they are definitely this ugly side of the gaming community. But I feel like those people were taken as the representation of what gamers are.
That's a very good point.
And of course, that if you were part of the gaming community of women, you didn't really want to speak up at that point because people were being doxxed, people were being attacked, people were having their home details published, their sex lives examined online, personal details put out there. And so therefore, obviously, other gaming communities weren't all and also because most of this was taking place on 4chan and 8chan, which generally your average middle-class white woman gamer doesn't have a fucking clue how to access. It wasn't happening in a world that they were involved in. So I think Gamergate's obviously a really important thing to talk about when we talk about the ugly side of communities, but I feel that we have to understand there are other people, and of course that was the point of Gamergate, is that there are other people involved in gaming, and when they tried to get recognised for it, they got shouted down by the patriarchy.
Yeah. I think that's a massively important point, actually, and as interestingly, I was had stepped out of the gaming community at that point, and so but not many years before that, I was very involved on a number of levels, and it wasn't, my community wasn't anything like that, and most of the people that I've known and met through gaming have been really lovely people who just love the games that they play, and even people who play games that I find too violent or aggressive, or games like we've talked about Rust and other games that are notorious for having crappy communities. There are still really nice groups within those spaces, so it definitely doesn't have to be that way. And I think it is a shame that when people finally noticed that there was this whole world of communities, that it was such a negative representation of them. I wanted to ask you, Matt, as the token male in this group, have you? I mean, you don't engage very much with sort of online communities. Is that right? Or is that Is it
No,
just
that
yeah?
is the way it is, and it hasn't changed in the 16 months that we've been doing this podcast. But ask away, ask away.
Yeah. No, I'm just wondering if you've avoided it because of this reputation, or whether it's just not something that's it just hasn't appealed to you. I'm not trying to suggest that you're an antisocial person.
I'm not antisocial. I just enjoy my own company. That's at the core of it for the most part. It's a bit like my approach with feminism. So the communities that I choose to engage with are feminist communities, increasingly socialist communities. They're places that I seek out that reflect things that I care about, and I think I'm quite lucky to not have been completely sucked in by those kinds of negative communities that you were talking about, Caroline, because their grift is to take insecure, uncertain young men and sort of indoctrinate them into the kind of really vitriolic, woman-hating people. And you talking about the gender-critical feminists, that we don't call them TERFs anymore, because we're trying to have a conversation. We're trying to talk you around. But so, yeah, gender critical feminists, and I mentioned it in one of our bonus episodes, the concept of everyone thinks that they're on the right side of history, that they're fighting the war for the right side of history. But if you think about yourself as on a battlefield and you're in your foxhole, and say you look around, you've got Kathleen Stock, you've got J.K. Rowling, and have any of you heard of Alison Bailey? So this was a headline from Telegraph from today. Lesbian barrister Alison Bailey claims employer crushed her spirit. Now you'd instantly go, my God, that sounds terrible, being discriminated against because she's lesbian. What is this about? Oh, she worked with Stonewall, and now she's claiming that because she is anti-trans, that her spirit was being crushed. So she's there. She looks out of her foxhole and sees, oh, Kathleen Stock and J.K. Rowling over there, great. But then she might look in the foxhole in front of her, and you see, oh, there's an awful lot of Christians who hate transvestites and are saying that abortion is murder and that women should only be vessels for God's children. There you go. Should I really be on the same side as them? And then there are people on there was a website called Return of Kings, which is a fascinating dive into this kind of stuff. Who one guy who said that there should be a year-round policy of fat shaming women, and that's what we should be focusing on. So really what that battlefield is you look around, look at the people around you and go, do I want to be surrounded by these people? Because we've got Sandy Toksvig, Emma Watson, Deborah Francis White, Pedro Pascal, a cavalcade of awesome people. And that shows that you're it's always good to double check with yourself. As you say, if you put yourself on a pedestal and say, I'm brilliant, I'm on the right side of history, you need to have that self-awareness to go, oh, am I? And then go, okay, yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I think that looking at who the company that you are keeping is usually a good way to work out whether it's where you really want to be. I think that the worrying thing is that it feels like quite a lot of people seem to be quite happy with that company, and you just feel like but I think I've been listening a lot to various podcasts about the culture wars, and I think it is it's an interesting situation actually, because we are at a real sort of crossroads, I think, now socially between and I like to hope that what it actually is the death throes, the last final attempt to hang on to the way things were by groups of people who can see that the tide has turned, and things are moving to sort of more enlightened and more intersectional society. That's what I hope. But
I have a hope and a worry, but I'll talk about that after everyone else say their thoughts first, because I've spoke for like 7 minutes then.
Well, I wanted to ask actually about how you feel that these online communities, these gaming communities specifically, rather than sort of general online communities, but gaming communities, how they may or are influencing society in the real world. I mean, do they have an influence? Is it something that we need to be aware of? And I think, Caroline, just thinking about Gamergate in that respect, not wanting to push you down talking about that, but just, we know that did have a quite a considerable impact beyond the gaming community, and is rate comes up in this culture wars discussion quite a lot. So that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, do you know what I found really interesting? I think about a lot when I started teaching in 2007, and so that's what you're saying, like, I wasn't very paying attention a lot when Gamergate was kicking off, because I was deep into my teaching career and had no spare time or energy whatsoever, so I wasn't paying attention. But I do remember very early on in my career that I had A-level students who used to joke about, they would always call guys chads. Oh, he's such a fucking chad, what a chad. And of course, now that we all sort of, incel culture and 4chan and stuff is much more exposed, we know that chad is a term that incels use to describe attractive men who don't have to try and get women, and that women will always pass them over for chads because women are shallow bitches who don't care about anything other than looks, according to the incel community. And I'm amazed how early that was going on, because I used to always, like, I remember these two lads who used to do it all the time, Roderick and Jack. I used to just be like, what the hell is a chad? Why do you keep... Yeah, Roderick. What I used to always go, what the hell is a chad? Why do you keep talking about chads? And they'd always just giggle and laugh, because it was a little secret joke for them, because they were involved in this little secret community. And, it was through gaming that they got into this. And, you would look at, again, I mean, I taught a lot of 17-year-old boys over the years, because I was an A-level politics teacher, and you do get mostly boys choosing politics. And you would see there is a correlation between people who are very involved in playing Call of Duty, FIFA, bloody FIFA. How is FIFA recruiting people? But like, I literally would have an empty classroom on the day a new FIFA game came out, and it used to drive me insane. They'd all skip school for 2 days to play FIFA. Anyway, that's not the point. There was definitely a correlation between those boys and the ones who were low-key misogynistic, ones who I would have to challenge statements that they made in, the sort of, when's International Men's Day type students, And we now, people like Laura Bates, who've done fantastic research into this, show that it's not just my anecdotal experience of it, it is clearly there. And there is a lot now where people are going, people are recruiting, and, I'm going to call it K-pop every time now. I can't believe
I think that's a way you could, like, actually subvert them.
And of course, K-pop supporters are brilliant people, genuinely, who have, like, done massive TikTok attacks on the far right. They are really nice people, so I'm sorry I keep associating them with QAnon. But there is plenty of evidence out there that QAnon and various other far right groups are using Call of Duty, Rust, gaming communities to recruit, to encourage. And I think one of the things that's interesting is, you were saying about, like, how is it different in gaming communities to just general online communities? if you go and look on my favorite subreddit, Gamer Girls, Girl Gamers, and all that, and you go and look at those experiences they're having, so often there is usually quite a young gamer girl who puts up something that says, I've got this crew on Fortnite, or I've got this crew on what's that game that everyone plays, Valorant and stuff like that? I'm too old, I have no idea. But she'll say, I've got this crew, we get on really well, but one of them keeps making horribly misogynistic jokes. Or one of them said something really racist the other day, and I don't know how to deal with it. And I think that's where the difference in gaming communities comes in, is because people aren't going in ready for a political argument or prepared to fight the culture wars, whatever that bullshit is, they are in what they consider to be a normal social environment. And then suddenly somebody drops in like a little bomb of nastiness, and they don't quite know how to react, because it's like it's like big family gathering where the ancient uncle says something horribly racist and everyone tries to sort of gloss over it and move on. It's that sort of situation, and that's how it breeds, because then it becomes normalizes and then it becomes acceptable. And the thing about why it's interesting seeing these things happen in gaming communities is because it's not designed to be a political discussion. So when people make it a political discussion, other people don't know how to react, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, interestingly, in the BBC sort of radio documentary, The Coming Storm, they make a direct link between QAnon and 4chan, or rather 8chan. So and I think it's been really fascinating to see that, and I think you're right. I think they are actively recruiting, as Matt said, as you said, Caroline. There is an active effort going on there, and I think I years ago, I think I've talked about this before. I heard about how humour can be used as a way to kind of bring in bad behaviours or whatever, sort of normalize behaviors that we don't approve of, and I think gaming is the same, and I think I've said that before as well. That when you're in this environment, you're perhaps more susceptible to that, because it's like, oh, it's just a joke. It's like when they talk about this sort of locker room humor, don't they? That's the thing that they it's just, and they don't talk about office humor. They don't talk about out at the school gates humor. They talk about it's locker room. It's a in a casual environment where everything's just fun and nothing's mean, and you've just got to take it all as a joke. And I think that in a gaming community, that's setting that sort of environment. So it makes it almost more makes it fertile, I think, for people to come in and plant seeds of discontent, and for their own reasons. I'm getting a bit conspiratorial. I know, but I think it is kind of going down that route. Alex, what do you think about?
I'm going to bring in a little curveball, I think. Well, it's not a curveball for me. I'm going to talk about two things I love, which are gaming and tennis, and how they intersect. And my first example that I thought of is a Russian tennis player, current world number 2 in the men's side, Daniil Medvedev, celebrated his first Grand Slam win at the US Open in 2021 by performing a dead fish at the moment of his match point. Does anyone know what a dead fish is?
No.
Apparently it's a FIFA celebration.
Well,
and,
you know how much I hate that game now.
Yeah, which is my point. But anyway, in his post-match press interview, he explained, let me see if I can find the exact quote, bear with me. Only legends will understand. What I did after the match was L2 and left. Which left a lot of the tennis commentators frankly quite bemused and confused. And then they put it down to, oh, it's a gaming thing. Oh yes, well, he does that. And now Daniel Medvedev is quite a controversial character within tennis. I'd say he's a Marmite. You either love him or hate him. He gets people's backs up and he enjoys doing it. So in that sense, there's the element of locker room humour, John, that you mentioned, where everything's a bit of banter and sometimes it might go over the line, sometimes it's not okay, but he's got a big personality and he leaves it all out on the court. The fact that everyone knows he's an avid gamer as well, I don't know, it kind of, for non-gamers, for people not involved in those communities, it sends out the message that gamers are all controversial and perhaps sometimes putting themselves a bit too far over the line. Another male tennis player that probably most people would know as being another similar character is Nick Kyrgios, Australian. Anyone know him? He's particularly similar and has both of them, well, Nick in particular, perhaps also for various other reasons because of tennis being elitist and possibly a bit racist, has been fined quite a lot for his antics on court, quite a lot more than some of the white players who do the same thing. But he's a very avid player of Fortnite as well, which again is another similar example of people looking in from the outside of a gaming community, unfamiliar with it, will see those two players and think, well, all gamers must be like that. I'm not saying that people think that, but if you're doing a snap judgment, that's what you think. And a ray of light also from the women's side, Naomi Osaka is also an avid gamer, and she's been doing an awful lot to advocate for mental health and the impact of the constant press conferences for players and the demands on their time, particularly after losing a match. And the fact that she refused to do press conferences for the entirety of the French Open, I think it was in 2021, and then was fined for not attending them because it's in the rules to attend them. That's a whole other thing. But there's that side as well where, because she's a woman, obviously she's treated differently. And I think the same kind of rings true within the gaming community, within any large community, really. And that's my little bit that I'll add to the conversation there.
Really interesting. It's made me think about the fact that they were sort of bringing stuff from the online world into the real world in very clearly in those circumstances, and it's made me think about whether we've talked about how we don't think that if you play violent games that you're going to go out and be a violent person, that the link between violent games and violent behaviour is very tenuous if it exists at all, and research has been very vague on that. But I do wonder whether the online communities, the gaming communities, whether what we should be looking at is normalizing of attitudes and normalizing of social interaction in a more insidious and subtle way, and whether that's actually what's happening here, that because you're in these spaces and this behavior is acceptable, that it's easy to go out and then behave like that outside of that environment. I mean, it's certainly something I say to my daughter, for example, about swearing. Like if you swear in these circumstances, that then you will accidentally swear in circumstances where you don't want to. And and I think because it just becomes second nature, it becomes habit. So yeah, I think there is that risk, and I wonder if maybe we should be looking at that more, and instead of just sort of saying, oh, he's a gamer, that's what he does, challenging that, because it's potentially creating unacceptable ways of behaving. Matt, I think you've got plenty to add to this.
Well, firstly, a ray of hope, potential hope, is that I think that we're winning the culture wars. The biggest barometer, one of the biggest barometers, is you look at Disney. Look what they're doing. They are building massively incredibly more inclusive and diverse things that they're doing, and they are absolutely crushing it in so many ways. And that means, with Disney's cutthroat capitalist, that means that they think that that is where the money is to be made. If they thought that standard white male patriarchy way it's always been stuff was the way to make more money, and that's what they would do. And that means that they are slowly painting themselves into a corner, because what this kind of stuff espouses is equality, it's love, it's diversity, it's I think they're going to be more LGBT inclusive, because the trajectory they're on is becoming more and more diverse. So in the culture war side, hopefully, well, the tricky bit is converting this intersectionality into actually changing and getting rid of capitalism. That is the weird bit which I'm worried about. And also thinking in union terms again, what I've noticed throughout the history of organised labour is that whenever the companies will do nothing, will go, no, we're not giving you anything, and the labour movement grows and grows and grows until there's a crisis point where they've actually got enough power to force the employers to do something. But then the employers run to the government and go, oh, help us, and then they crush and destroy the union workers. And then that is the pattern that has been following with the organised labour movement for the last century a bit. And as you can see with the 4chan, 8chan, Trump, right wing rising and rising and rising, the worrying part is what happens when we reach that next boiling point. But I'm hopeful. I'm an eternal optimist somehow.
Okay, well, I want to do it like a quick fire round on whether you feel that gaming communities are a force for good or a force for bad. And you can choose to answer good, bad, or ugly. So let's start with Matt.
Bad.
Caroline?
Oh, do we not get to elucidate on it?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, please do. No, please do.
Oh, okay. Bad because anywhere where why do companies want deregulation? Why do people like Elon Musk say they don't want any rules on Twitter at all? So they think we want a level playing ground for everyone. If we get rid of the rules, then everyone's equal. But if you get rid of the rules, the status quo doesn't change. The patriarchy doesn't change. Capitalism doesn't change. So when you remove the moderation, I think the purpose is an important part, because like you were saying about gamers come into these places to play a game and they interact while they're playing the game. That means that conversation place is nebulous, which means that anything can happen there, and that's why they're such a good recruiting ground for people who aren't really looking for something, but then they get attracted by something because of these predatory recruiting forces. So I worry that outside of your personal gaming circle, I would say that they are more negative than positive.
Okay. So, Caroline.
I'm going to make it so that Alex has to think of a reason to say that they're good. So I'd say gaming communities are ugly. Everything in life is ugly. There is nothing perfect. There is nothing perfect is out there. There is an ugly side to everything. But I think that I think that for starters, just doing a little bit of research while we're talking, but the statistics on how much kids are being radicalized into the horrible alt-right, it's far worse on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook what they're seeing than it is in the gaming communities, right? So for starters, it's not the worst offender out there by any means. Secondly, I don't think shutting ourselves off from the world is ever the solution. I think one of the things I have always enjoyed about being part of a political party, one of the few things I ever enjoy about being part of a political party is canvassing, because you go and knock on people's doors and you talk to them about what they think. And these are people that you wouldn't necessarily hear from. They are in a different circle from you. And I find it ever enriching and important to see, this is what somebody else's worldview is. It may be completely different from mine. I may disagree with it, but lots of people in the world think like them, so it's worth knowing. And I think that the same is with the gaming communities. And I've had some great experiences with gaming communities. There are many times when I don't want to engage with the real world. And so I've overused these today. I'm sorry. And also I think I'm getting old because that one feels a bit stiff now. So, anyway, right. It's a gaming injury. But I think that engaging with people is always good. There's things that could be better. But I definitely say gaming communities are ugly because everything in the world is.
Okay. Alex.
Okay, well, I'm left for good, and I will attempt to say good.
You don't have to go for good.
No, it's okay. I will say that I think wherever there's a community, there will always be conflict, no matter how long it's living for, because that's just human nature. But I think one of the ways they can be good, and I'm going to steal this shamelessly from work, which is our attempted new moderation policy. But you didn't hear it here, no one heard it. Is that if you post to harm, then that's no good. But if you post to help, that's what we want. So you must always post to help and not to harm. And if you take that and apply it to any community or any sort of situation that you're in, you're always going to get good out of people, or you're going to see good from people when you promote helping rather than harming people. And that is how they can be good. But not everyone's going to get on board with that. So it is difficult to see. But
that did just remind me of one of my biggest bugbears about, and this is completely unrelated, but I just want to mention it. Do you know what I hate most is on like Reddit threads or like just online forums places where people have gone, oh, could somebody tell me how this happens? Or like, how do you access this? How do you access that? The first response is always from some dickhead who goes, you should have Googled it first, it's there. Or like, actually, if you reread everything that was ever on this forum, you would know. It's like, fuck off.
Well, actually, it's the best. Well, actually,
and it's just you reminded me, it's like post to help, not to hate.
Yes, it's true.
Do no harm. No, I think that's a really good way to kind of approach it all. I personally think that I agree with everything that everyone said, actually, and I think that you're absolutely right, Caroline. Everything is ugly. Everything has multiple layers. But overall, I choose to believe that gaming communities are a positive force, because although I think they can be a hotbed for negative views and attitudes and behavior, I think they are also an awesome space that can bring together people from multiple different environments. And I think that's what you were saying, Caroline, that it's an opportunity to mix with people from all around the world, people who and in the same way as going to a concert is an awesome experience because you're in a room with a bunch of people who just love the bands that you're there to see as much as you do. Being in a gaming community is often the same. Everyone there really likes this game and gets cross about the same things you do and has advice on the thing that you're stuck with. And I think, there are always assholes really in every community, in every group. But if it's properly nurtured, then a gaming community can be an extremely positive space. And I have known spaces like that which have not only introduced me to awesome people, but have also been there for people who have gone through really difficult times, for people who would otherwise have been isolated in their situation. So I think it's, but I do also believe very strongly in moderation, and I think that's how you keep a community on its best behavior. So is there anything, before we go on to the wildcard question, which I'm still trying to think of, is there anything that anyone wants to share?
I thought about it actually earlier when Alex said about moderation right at the beginning, and you've just reminded me then again by saying it. What I think is interesting with moderation is that you don't have to be neutral, in the sense that that doesn't mean you don't have an opinion. I think that it is worth having people who do have an opinion. And I said I wasn't going to bore you with the Lib Dem youth and students, but back in the early 2000s, it was my favourite message board, and I was not a member of the Liberal Democrats. I was an evil Tory back in those days. This is back in the sort of 2004 period. And I spent a lot of time there, and the Lib Dem youth and students message board had a moderator who was a member of the Lib Dems, and they eventually asked if I would be a moderator as well, mainly because I was so sad that I was on there all the time and they knew I'd be able to deal with any comments quickly. But what we rapidly found was that by having both a Lib Dem and a Tory moderating, it gave people more of a sense of fairness. It gave people a sense that and also they knew who was moderating, which helps as well. Yes. And I think that moderation should be open, balanced, clear how it's being done. And I think those sort of factors make a huge difference, because then everybody knows where it's coming from and it makes them feel a little bit more invested in how it's happening.
Sorry, Caroline, for my reaction. You're just bringing up a lot of conversations we've had at work with the
yes, I can
community
imagine.
co-production group, which have been quite fraught at times. But we're getting through it. People, I think, yes, it's very difficult with moderation sometimes, because people, when they have strong beliefs and views, and they feel very attached to those views, feel like everything should be moderated to reflect their views, which isn't exactly how we want to be doing things. We do want to be trying to be fair and open. But yes, it is true. It's easier said than done, I would say.
And on a large scale, that's a completely different thing. I was talking,
exactly.
We probably had about 200 regular posters, and you'd
Yeah,
get to know
we're
them.
probably similar, but yeah.
One person had really bad mental health issues, and when they posted excessively, I was able to sort of take them offline and have conversations with them about it, and sort of say, right, you're obviously having a bad week, so we're going to suspend you until you're feeling better, and then you're welcome to come. And it's being able to develop those sort of relationships that in the worlds of Twitter and Facebook, no chance whatsoever.
No way.
No. Yeah. Does anyone else have anything they would like to add?
I think one thing that really is an integral thing to consider in any conversation about particularly the way young men, boys and young men interact in most spaces, but these days particularly online spaces, is the search for male role models. And I can't tell you the amount of time where young boys and men are lost, desperately searching for something to emulate to make themselves feel like real men. And the amount of times that I have gone, I wish I was like him, and wish I could do that, to men doing and saying and being just horrible, appalling things. The amount of times that I've gone, oh, I wish I could be like that, because I was lost looking for something. And far too often, those young men are being met with very, very dangerous, toxic, misogynistic, racist men who go, "Hey, man, over there, come over and hang out with us." And that's I think it's hard to that is a extremely integral part to how men live their lives, that I think it's not given that is a very, very powerful irrational impulse that boys and young men have, and so it's not always because they're bad people. It's just that they've been led in a bad direction.
They've been made to feel validated by these people. Sorry, that's all I wanted to say. But the danger is when they're been made to feel validated, and it takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there in an online space sometimes and be open about how you're feeling and about life, and to then be validated by a set of people who hold certain views, let's say. You're then going to stick around those people because they welcomed you in. So it is tricky. It's tricky.
Much like why I was an evil Tory in the early 2000s. Genuinely, though, it was like, I found a group of people who, as you say, validated me, praised me, said, come and be one of us. And it starts to reinforce that thing. It's very true.
Which is back to the community and having a shared set of values and shared goals and things. So that brings us full circle. So we've run out of time, so I don't have time to ask my amazing wildcard question. You'll never know. So that was really fascinating. Again, I think we could probably go on for another hour about this, but it was just a really interesting subject and something that's quite close to my heart. So it's been really interesting to hear your views on it, and really nice to kind of get have a good old chat about it. So we've been Gaming the System, and you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, everywhere, Spotify, iPlayer, everywhere that you get your podcast from.
iPlayer? Are we on the BBC now?
Not iPlayer.
iTunes, maybe?
iTunes. That's what I mean. I'm on the BBC quite a lot. No, not me personally.
It's like K-pop and QAnon. It's fine.
iPlayer, QAnon, yeah. Anyway, get your podcasts wherever you get them from, and please do give us 5 stars, because that is what makes people see us. And comment, get involved. We're really interested to hear what everyone thinks about these topics, and we are releasing something every Thursday evening and other points during the week. And that's been us.